It's embarrassing to talk to European audiences about either public space or urbanism, because to some degree, all we can talk about are the embarrassments of what America has done to itself. Including, I would add, the embarrassment of our homelessness, which, forgive me for making this point, but we only have ourselves to blame. In the 1970s, the politically progressive elements of American society decided that mentally ill people were an oppressed minority class that should not be kept in institutions, because we had a very rich set of institutions, and there was a gradient of institutions from the ones that were not very good to the ones that were actually okay. And it was the progressive classes of America who destroyed the institutions. So I have very little sympathy for that problem, which we brought on ourselves. We're going to talk about the future here, and it's not the future that most of us expect. There's a lot of ground to cover, and I want to give you a succinct picture of the economic and political problems that we face that are going to compel us to do things differently than we're doing and to create different expectations for the city than we have now. So this is probably the plausible scale of the urban place of the future, and this is the European version. This is the American version. Unfortunately, for the moment, these buildings are not inhabited and they're not activated. They're empty, as opposed to the European buildings, which are activated. They will be reactivated, but not for quite a while. This is the American small city of Troy, New York. And the action actually is going to move to the smaller cities and smaller towns of America from the larger cities. This is normal America. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but this is where most of Americans live. And it's important. I had an interesting exchange with a friend yesterday, a woman who writes speeches for the president of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a big engineering and architecture school in the USA. Huh? There you go. And I was making some remarks about how dreadful Detroit was, where we've just been in Detroit. And she said, well, you know, America, she wrote me back and said, you know, America's not really about that. It's about energy. It's all about the energy of, you know, life, not about the beauty and artistry of life. I think the mistake she's making is that the byproduct of energy is entropy, the force in nature that moves us towards death and stasis. And what is characteristic about the American landscape is that it is entropy made visible. That's why it hurts us so much. That's why it's so destructive to our spirits and to our daily life. Okay, this is the normal mixed street in Europe. This is the street that Americans will pay $5,000 on vacation to go and walk down the normal European street, because our streets are so miserable. You know, this is our street. This is the normal European street. You know, if you lived anywhere near that street, you would be psychotic in 6 months. But, you know, there are things that are tending that way in Europe, and this is a building in Stockholm designed to be awesome and mystifying, but not necessarily to be spiritually satisfying or to provide any artistry. And what is missing most from the United States, especially, what's most noticeable is the utter absence of artistry in our daily surroundings. We've banished artistry from American life, and it's another one of the things that is making us miserable. Some basic equations about the economic situation, okay? Just so you understand this. For the last several years, the public has been misled into thinking that we don't have a problem with petroleum anymore. That's not true. We still have a huge problem with petroleum, and it can be rectified down to this simple equation that the oil over $75 a barrel destroys industrial economies. They are not designed to run on oil that expensive. And oil under $75 a barrel destroys oil companies. And what you're seeing now is a dance between those two conditions, destroying first the economy, then the oil economy, then the oil production, then the economy again, then the oil industry. And this is going to continue to go on, and it's going to be a stair-step down. One of the main economic problems with this is without affordable energy coming into your economy, you cannot expect to generate the kind of debt that will be repaid. You cannot have any expectation that debt will be repaid. And we have been running our industrial economies on debt for the last 30 years to compensate for the fact that we're not really accumulating any real capital. And so one of the consequences of the future will be tremendous capital shortages, and we're not aware of that because we're playing games with money, especially in the United States, but also it's certainly true of the European Union. I know you're not members of the Euro Club, but both the United States and the Eurozone are engaging in pervasive accounting fraud to cover up the fact that we're insolvent, that the debts we've generated cannot be repaid, and we cannot generate new debt with any expectation that it will be paid back. And ultimately, the destination of this behavior will be to destroy the wealth of nations and destroy the capital that we need to continue being civilized. Another feature of economic life that is hugely misunderstood is the idea that globalism is supposed to be a permanent part of the human condition. That is not true. Globalism is a set of transient economic relations that happened at a certain point in human history for special reasons, namely about 70 years of relative peace between the great powers and about 100 years of extremely cheap energy coming into the industrial economy. And that's what produced the global economic relations that we call globalism. It is now unwinding as the energy inputs become problematical and the capital formation becomes problematical. And now you're beginning to see serious friction between the economic players, currency wars, trade wars, things like that. And the upshot of all this is not what we expect. The upshot is, and this goes against all of the fantasies of eternal expansion of what we're doing. We are entering a period of comprehensive contraction that will go on as far ahead as anybody in this room will be alive. And that is going to define the world that we're facing ahead. And it has certain implications. And by the way, one of the problems associated with this is, of course, the demographic problem, that the parts of the world where these people are coming from can no longer support populations that large for one reason or another. And they are now beginning this tremendous movement from the parts of the world that can no longer support them. Of course, the climate issue is very much with us, and you could devote a whole PowerPoint lecture to that. I just want to mention it. It's lurking there in the background. And so there's a great deal of confusion about what we're going to do. You know, where do we go with all this? And we in America, we're completely baffled, and this is the result. This is the metaphor for how the American people are right now, or at least about 6 months ago. This is the update. Okay, this is where we're heading. And, well, I'm just repeating myself. So, you know, what's it going to be? Is it going to be the suburban fiasco? Is it going to be the utopia, the green fantasy of the green city of towers? Is it going to be the Arcadian ideal? We don't really know what the city is going to be like, but I've got some opinions about that, and I think one of them is that the future is telling us very loudly to get smaller and get more local. And if we don't start doing that, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And all of our grandiose fantasies about expansion are going to be tremendously disappointed. And by the way, the places that will be successful are places that have a meaningful relationship with food production, because Industrial agriculture, it will be coming to an end. Its days are numbered, where you just put the petroleum and the gas byproducts on the soil and you produce all the grain. Okay, that's how we've been doing it for the last 100 years. We're coming to the end of that. This is what we're doing in New York City. We're building more megastructures, and there are some things that you can state categorically about this, in my opinion. One is, by the way, some of these buildings are already built, and some of these buildings have been permitted by the authorities for construction. You can say categorically, the skyscraper or tower is an obsolete building form, okay? Most of us don't realize that, especially the architects, because the architects and the developers they work for want, first of all, to maximize the floor to area ratio of the floor plate of the property in order to make more commissions and make more rents and make more sales of property. So they're never going to tell you about this until the crisis actually hits. But the reason these buildings are obsolete is not because of the heat and the air conditioning and the elevators. It's because they'll never be renovated. That's the real reason. And we don't get that. They will never be renovated. They will not have another generation of life. The capital is not going to be there to renovate them. And probably the modular fabricated materials are not going to be there to renovate them. And we're going to be entering a crisis of modular fabricated materials. We're not prepared for this at all. We're not thinking about it. The people in architecture and urbanism are not talking about this. Where are we going to get the sheetrock? Sheetrock is a very, it seems like a very simple material, right? It's very complicated to make, requires a huge amount of energy, requires massive mining operations and long supply lines to make it and deliver it to the people who use it. All these other things, trusses and metal trusses, claddings, rebar. We take for granted that this stuff is going to be with us forever. Cement, which requires tremendous amounts of energy to make. I don't have any confidence that this stuff is going to be here in 30 years to fix those buildings. And you should not assume that it's true. And almost none of the fantasies that are popular today about how the city is going to be will work without this stuff. Especially, how are we going to renovate the Danny Libeskind buildings? How are we going to renovate the Frank Gehry buildings with the titanium claddings on them? Forget about it. We're done with that. So we're going to have to start thinking about building, using materials found in nature again. I know that sounds very extreme, but for what it's worth, that's where the action's going to be. And you're going to have to learn how to make buildings stand up doing that. And that has very important implications we're going to get to in a moment. I want to mention another reason why the megastructure or the tower is obsolete. It's because the financial model or formula that was used in the last 30, 40 years to deliver these things is not going to work. The condominium model of breaking up the building into different ownerships and then forming a property association to take care of the building. We've been using that for all this time. It works very well when you're going up the mountain of creating more and more debt. When you get into a debt crisis where debt cannot be repaid, it completely falls apart. The model for financing completely falls apart. And we're not going to be able to do it anymore. This was an experiment that was never tried before in human history, financing megastructures by little pieces. And in a way, it was an accounting fraud. It was a way of assigning debt to different groups of people in ways that they thought it would be able to be paid back. It's not going to be paid back. These buildings are going to fail. All right. Talk a little about the architecture. And the question that I think we have to ask about, how we feel and in relation to how the buildings behave is, does it reward the human spirit or does it punish the human spirit? Are you being punished for being there? Are you being rewarded for being there? And the means to deliver the reward is something called artistry. Artistry. And that has fallen into disrepute too in our time because so much of the art that's delivered is fake art. It's actually just egotistical performance and the demonstration of new metaphysical theories of thought. And that's been promulgated, of course, in the graduate schools in America, where in order to justify any particular thing you do, you have to invent a completely new cosmology in order to justify what you're doing. So here's a typical building in America. This is the Congress Avenue side of Boston City Hall. And it's one of those buildings where, nobody wants to venture down this street because it's too punishing to go down this one block. It makes you feel so bad. This building is so despotic. It makes you feel like a termite down there, like you don't belong there. I want to just squash you, right? And so what is this building actually saying, Well, it's never been very clear, so I'm going to clear that up right now by redesigning the building. This is what the building should really show to indicate how it feels about you. Okay? If they just put some banners there on the building, everybody would understand what this building is doing. It would be very clear, and then maybe we wouldn't do it anymore. Of course, one of the problems with using the synthetic and modular materials that are at hand is that we've built millions and millions of structures that have very poor prospects for lasting over the decades to come. And I think that one of the hallmarks of the period that's coming up is that we are going to have to use more materials that will last a long time, and we're going to have to put them together in a way that the buildings will stand up for a long time. A very strange thing happens in the middle of the 18th century, the 1700s. And Edmund Burke comes along just as Western civilization is entering the industrial age. And Edmund Burke comes up with a new way of looking at basic aesthetics. In other words, artistry, the delivery of the human reward. And he invents this new thing that he calls the sublime, as opposed to the beautiful. How many of you are familiar with the English philosopher Edmund Burke? Okay, so maybe this idea of the sublime is familiar to you. And the idea of the sublime, as opposed to the beautiful, was the sublime was supposed to make you experience terror, pain, and violent emotion. In a way, we might say that it was a reaction to the extreme intellectual rigor of the Enlightenment and all of the baggage of the Enlightenment. And we begin to enter at the end of the 18th century, the end of the 1700s, we begin to enter the Romantic period of Western civilization, as characterized, for example, by Rousseau and his writings and thoughts, and the example of the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And so we're moving into this period of time that needs some new way of explaining itself to itself. And Edmund Burke does that. And this is what we see now in much of the popular architecture of our time. By the way, this building that I'm showing you is less than 10 years old. It is the concert hall in Nashville by David Schwartz, one of America's finest classical architects. And this, of course, is Liebeskind, right? This is the pavilion at a recent exposition, okay? So you have these two things. You have the beautiful and the sublime, and they are represented at different poles. The beauty, truth, and goodness go together. Terror, artifice, and entropy go together. By the same token, you can say that you have these things called timeless virtue, which includes beauty, truth, and goodness. There's also the Latin words that are the counterparts to that. Firmitas, venustas, and what's the other one? Commoditas? Yeah, or utilitas. And at the other end of the spectrum of the Sublime, of Edmund Burke Sublime, you get techno-narcissistic pretense. The invention of new cosmologies to justify stunts that are pulled in order to make you feel punished in your environment. And that's what we're doing. We're producing the terror, the artifice, and the entropy. And you know what? Life is punishing enough for everybody. We don't need more extra punishment from Danny Libeskind. Sometimes this is called the cutting edge. The cutting edge is the new holy grail of architecture. And we have left all this behind. We don't care about this anymore. Timeless artistry, beauty, truth, and goodness. That's in the garbage barge of history now. And this is what we're now living with, is the cutting edge. And where this comes from is this idea that the architects are creatures who have arrived from another planet with supernatural abilities to understand what it is that the human race really needs, and they've decided that we actually need more anxiety and disorientation, and we need to be confounded by our surroundings, not living in surroundings that we understand. This is the new art museum in Denver, Colorado, a building that you feel is going to impale you. And so, if this doesn't inspire terror, I don't know what does. You really also have to wonder, what do you suppose the exhibition spaces are like in here? Kind of hard to imagine, huh? Danny strikes again. The cutting edge is literally a cutting edge. Going through, this is the museum in Dresden. There he is again. The cutting edge has cut a museum in half in Toronto. We don't need this. This is not helping. This is just, we don't need any more anxiety in human life. Geary in Las Vegas, literally demonstrating how entropy works with the building melting down, And by the way, that will be the destiny of this building, because this will never be fixed. They'll never be renovated. And we're seeing one by one, the failure of the Starchitect buildings. Geary especially. He was sued for hundreds of millions of dollars by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for designing a building that leaked 5 years after it was completed. Same thing with Eisenman in the Wexner Center in Columbus, Ohio, the art museum of Ohio State University, sued because the roof failed. So one of the implications of having to resort back to materials found in nature is that we're probably going to be served well if we pay some heed to what classicism was about. Because classicism was first and foremost about giving buildings the ability to stand up, to be tectonically sound, and then to endow them with embellishment that informed us about who we are culturally, and to also inform us about who we are as organisms, and we're human beings. And so classicism is typically, it is one ordering system of architecture. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it is a very important one. And it is especially important to Western civilization, which, by the way, is worth defending. And one of the characteristics of classicism is that it exhibits the three-part construction of the body. The base of the body, and the middle of the body, and the top of the body, the bottom, middle, and top. And it expresses the upright human figure, which is a dignified figure. It's a dignified organism. Another thing that it does so well is that it is, because of the way classicism is constructed as sets of nested hierarchies of things, usually in three parts, it tends to produce relationships rather than objects. So when you're looking at some of these buildings, they're not necessarily just objects. They are expressive of relationships of the things within the object. In other words, a window is not just a hole in the wall. This is just a hole in the wall. This is something which is essentially a relationship between the outside and the inside. It's as simple as that. And this is a failure of a relationship between the inside and the outside. Possibly because some of these windows don't open. And that's how you know it's a failure of that relationship. Another thing you can see, now this is not a great building, it's kind of a vulgar work of classicism, but it illustrates something interesting. See the top here where the balustrade is? That illustrates a relationship between where the building ends and the sky begins. And it informs you of that because you can see the sky beginning to peep through the actual material construction of the building. And it tells you that the whole building exists in a relationship with the things around it, like the sky. In other words, the milieu that we live in. It isn't just a flat, canonical flat roof with an air conditioner on top. And so it's all about the relationships. And by the way, I probably don't have to tell you this, but the three-part construction of this building is also reiterated in the three-part construction of the window with, the sill and the portico over it and the sashes on the side. So this three-part construction is reiterated throughout, and it is one of the reasons that the buildings stand up. In the best urban scenes, what you get are orders of unity that allow diversity to thrive within the orders of unity. But we don't believe that the orders of unity are needed anymore. Okay, we've given up on that. And what you see here with basically the Haussmann era design of the streets is that you have buildings where the transition lines generally agree, but they're not necessarily identical. In fact, this is a lot less identical than many Haussmann boulevards in France. But within those strong, forceful orders of unity, the size, the heights of the building, these are all unified at 5 or 6 stories, and the way the string courses and belt courses and transitions are arrayed, and the fact that all the windows are vertical, which, by the way, express the dignity of the human upright figure. When you see a horizontal window, that indicates that the human figure is either asleep, dead, or having sex. And none of those are dignified positions in the public space. So the orders of unity are tremendously important, but we don't believe in that anymore. We have an obsession now with this thing called diversity, which in America now is total bullshit. Every time you hear that word, your bullshitometer, the needle should go way up. And here's an interesting example of it, because here is a neighborhood in London where the buildings are all absolutely identical. And nobody is suffering from a lack of diversity in this beautifully ordered and milieu. Because what you're seeing here are orders of excellence. And that's what makes it as good as it is. Of course, we've lost the idea of the virtue of the grid itself and the power of the grid. And I just want to remind you that the grid is extremely important. And at the scale that we're going to have to be designing in the future, it is going to be very important to make our places comprehensible. Because we're going to be living in a period of substantial disorder of different kinds: economic disorder, visual disorder, political disorder, and I think we will discover that it will become much more important to live in an ordered public realm. Another thing we've lost in the last century and a half is the idea that the middle of the block has value for anything except car storage, right? But here you see an example of a hypothetical block that has all kinds of opportunities for many rich activities to take place in the middle of the block, and many different states of being, from the little interior courtyard of the institutional building, the actual small plaza that anybody can go to, another institutional building with a courtyard, residential buildings that have a certain attitude to both the outer edge of the block and the interior of the block. You have opportunities for serenity and tranquility, and you have opportunities for action. And so we have to get very interested again in what happens in the center of the block. Here you have an example of where beauty actually can meet the sublime in a way that works, but in a way in which the ordering system of classicism more or less tames the sublime and doesn't allow it to become destructive. Okay, here's a little park in Paris. This is what it's often referred to as the green space. Okay, it's not even green, but people want to go there. Why do they like to go there? Because it is peaceful and tranquil. Because it is a break from the frantic activity of the city. And you come here to be peaceful. One of the great virtues of French design is that it remains highly geometric. They still believe in geometry. And geometry, of course, is a very strong ordering system. And the geometry of this little park, with its straight alleys and the benches all lined up, is that it's powerfully tranquilizing to be in a place that has order in it. We yammer about green space in the United States all the time. And the reason that there's so much yammer about it is because we have absolutely no faith that the architects and urban designers can deliver something that is worthy of us, and especially worthy of our affection. And so the remedy for that is nature. If the architects and urban designers can't give you a good place, put nature there. So that's what we do. I call it the nature Band-Aid, or the nature bandage, where the city in one way or another has failed or has been mutilated. We put the bandage over it with the little shrubs and the trees. But to illustrate the fact it's not necessary in the best public spaces in the world, and this is one in front of the Pantheon in Rome, the hardscape is doing all the work of being excellent. It doesn't require so much as a potted plant to make it more excellent. So it's important to understand that it can be done, and you don't necessarily have to put the parsley around the pig, as they say. So, a hopeful future. That's something of a question. I think that we need to reorient ourselves towards an urban design that delivers reward, not punishment, especially not deliberate punishment. I mean, when you hear or read the interview with Libeskind or Koolhaas, and he says, I want people to be anxious around this building. Why do you accept that? That's not acceptable. That's not what human beings need. We don't need to be made more fearful. We need to be rewarded by our surroundings, or we shouldn't build them at all.